Have you ever wondered why being alone brings you peace, while for so many others it is synonymous with suffering? Have you ever felt like there was something wrong with you for not wanting to be at parties, gatherings, or surrounded by people all the time? From an early age, we are taught that a person's worth lies in their ability to expose themselves, to be charismatic, talkative, and sociable. But what if I told you that this is just an imposed narrative, and that in fact your desire for silence and solitude may be one of the deepest signs of psychological maturity? We live in a culture shaped by performance, hyperconnection, and the constant need to be visible. Social media, endless meetings, the glorification of networking. Everything pushes us away from ourselves. Being introspective has become synonymous with being antisocial. Enjoying being alone has turned into a sign of weakness, weirdness, or worse, some kind of emotional illness. And that's where Carl Gustav Jung comes in, one of the few thinkers who had the courage to assert the opposite. Jung observed, with surgical precision, that Western society has developed a deep prejudice against introversion. He realized that many people are not fleeing the world when they isolate themselves, but rather returning home, inward. According to him, there is a crucial difference between loneliness and solitude. And most people don't even know that this distinction exists. Loneliness is the painful emptiness. Solitude is the healing silence. And maybe you are here because you feel that calling. Because you have already noticed that the more you force yourself to fit into noisy environments, the more distant you feel from yourself. Perhaps you have learned to act, to smile, to chat, to socialize, when all your soul was asking for was space, tranquility, breath. But what no one told you is that this preference of yours is not a flaw. It is a sign that your psyche is maturing, that you are developing something Jung called psychological self-sufficiency, the rare ability to generate meaning from within, without relying on the constant stimulation of the external world. This video is a direct conversation with you, who feels that the noisy world has suffocated your essence. You who have been labeled as strange, disconnected, lonely, when in fact you are just trying to stay whole. Here, we will talk about the psychology behind people who prefer to be alone, and show you that perhaps this need for solitude is not an escape, but a reunion. Are you ready to see silence with new eyes? The idea that those who prefer to be alone are suffering is a great misunderstanding in many ways. That silence is empty. That isolation is a problem to be fixed. For generations, we have confused solitude with loneliness. And this confusion has caused a silent damage to the psyche of millions of people. Carl Jung was one of the first to break this illusion. He understood that being alone does not mean being lost. Quite the opposite. For Jung, solitude is a state of conscious choice, an internal decision to step away from the noise of the world to hear something much more important, oneself. While loneliness is a hole created by the absence of connection, solitude is a space created for the deepest reconnection that exists, with your own self. People who cultivate solitude are not hiding. They are finding themselves. They do not avoid life. They savor it at a different frequency. In a world that glorifies constant exposure, solitude is an act of resistance, almost a spiritual protest. It requires courage, because being alone in silence is facing what most flee from, their own thoughts, traumas, repressed desires, and inconvenient truths. But see the paradox. Society harshly judges those who withdraw, as if human value were directly linked to the number of social interactions one maintains, as if silence were failure, not wisdom. This distorted view causes many introverts to grow up feeling defective, struggling against their own nature, trying to mold themselves into a personality that does not belong to them. But Jung knew something that few have the audacity to say out loud. It is in silence that you heal. It is when you are alone that you finally hear your intuition, notice your patterns, understand your pain, and access what he called the unconscious. It is in this internal space that true transformation occurs. Solitude is the incubator of self-knowledge. And here is one of the most counterintuitive discoveries. The more time a person spends in true solitude, and not in forced isolation, the more they develop a powerful presence, clarity in their words, a peace that does not depend on anyone else. They become dangerous to the system because they no longer need to be convinced of anything. They do not need to fill voids with distractions. They are enough. Perhaps you have felt this. Perhaps you are on this path now, feeling that the more you silence the external world, the more the internal world begins to expand. And this is just the beginning. In the next part, we will dive into the heart of this journey, the psychic energy of the introvert, and why this way of functioning may be one of the most sophisticated expressions of the human soul. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The introvert's mind does not function like others, and this is not a flaw. It is a radically different psychic configuration. Carl Jung realized that some people are simply not made for excessive stimulation, for incessant hustle, for the superficial noise of everyday interactions. They were made to dive deep, to contemplate, to explore the depths of the human psyche as one navigates an invisible ocean. And this type of mind operates at a different rhythm. Jung called this energy orientation introversion. Contrary to common belief, he did not see it as withdrawal or insecurity. He viewed it as a specific type of emotional intelligence, an intelligence that operates from the inside out. The introvert absorbs the world intensively. They do not just hear, they listen to the subtext. They do not just see, they perceive what lies behind what is shown. In a single conversation, they pick up on micro-expressions, hesitations, contradictions, subtle tones of emotion that most do not even notice. This is exhausting. This weighs heavily. This requires time. Therefore, solitude is not a luxury for the introvert. It is a biological and spiritual necessity. Being alone is the moment when they reconnect with their center, recharge their energy, and most importantly, where they can hear their own voice, the one that gets lost in the daily clamor. While the extrovert recharges in the presence of others, the introvert only rebalances in their absence. The energy that drives them comes from different sources. And here is a central point. Modern culture, dominated by ideals of productivity, exposure, and constant sociability, was not made for this type of mind. Since childhood, the introvert is pushed out of themselves. When they prefer to read instead of playing with peers, they are called strange. When they remain silent in a conversation circle, they are seen as arrogant or apathetic. When they need silence, they are accused of coldness. All of this contributes to a deep internal disconnection, a constant feeling of inadequacy. The world convinces them that there is something wrong with being who they are. And thus, the performance cycle is born. The introvert begins to act. They learn to smile when they don't want to talk when they would rather be silent, to expose themselves when everything inside them calls for retreat. But each of these small betrayals comes at a cost. Jung identified this as chronic psychic exhaustion, a weariness that is not visible but gradually erodes the soul. A fatigue that does not come from the body, but from the continuous effort of playing a role that suffocates who you really are. Perhaps you know this fatigue. Perhaps it is within you now. The weight of forced interactions, of environments that demand more than you can give, of conversations that seem to drain your vital energy. This exhaustion is a clear sign that your energy is being directed outward, when in fact, it should be protected and cultivated internally. Jung saw the introvert as someone who lives in constant tension with the world, a tension between the need to adapt and the call to remain true to one's own nature. But he also believed that it is precisely in this conflict that the potential for deep self-knowledge resides. The introvert has a rare advantage. They carry within them a vast and still unexplored universe. They just need the courage to access it without guilt. And this courage begins when you stop seeing yourself as a problem to be solved and start seeing yourself as a territory to be explored. When you understand that your silence is not absence, but density, that your need for solitude is not weakness, but psychic refinement, and that your way of existing in the world, although misunderstood, carries a silent strength that many will never achieve. But the question remains, what happens to the introvert who tries to fit in for too long? What forces their psychic energy to operate in opposition to their nature? Who wears the mask of extroversion day after day until they forget who they were beneath it? This is what we will discuss in the next part, the high price of social performance and what it does to your mind, your identity, and your soul. Few things corrode the soul of an introvert as much as the constant need to perform, to force smiles, sustain empty conversations, fill uncomfortable silences with words that do not come naturally, and all of this in the name of a false adaptation, of a social survival that demands a high psychological cost, the abandonment of oneself. Carl Jung observed that when someone lives disconnected from their inner nature for too long, fragmentation begins to occur. The psyche enters a state of tension. The self feels pressured to split. On one side, the social persona, shaped to please, belong, function within the demands of the collective. On the other, the authentic self, stifled, silent, hidden in the background of the mind. The further you walk away from your essence to meet external expectations, the more fragile and artificial your identity becomes. This division is not harmless. It comes at a price. And not just emotional. It manifests physically. Constant fatigue, insomnia, social anxiety, a sense of emptiness even in crowded environments. Have you ever felt tired before the day even started? Have you ever entered a social setting and within minutes wished to disappear? Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were no longer there? This is the cost of performance. It is the internal collapse of someone who spends too much time living a life that does not represent who they truly are. And society applauds this performance. It rewards those who speak loudly, who always smile, who expose themselves without reservations. But no one asks what the price is paid behind the scenes. Western culture has turned extroversion into an ideal, a kind of superior personality associated with success, charisma, and leadership. And this forces millions of introverts around the world to silence their nature to survive in a world that was not made for them. Jung knew that this forced adaptation was a subtle form of psychic violence. He observed that many neuroses, many identity crises, and even deep depressive episodes stemmed from this prolonged disconnection. The introvert who feels compelled to live as an extrovert without ever having time or space to return to their center becomes ill, not because they are weak, but because they have been trained to ignore their own fundamental needs. And the most insidious part is that over time, this constant performance becomes a second skin. The person forgets who they were before they started pretending. They become what others want to see, and in doing so, they lose the only thing that truly matters, the connection with their own self. But there is a breaking point, a moment when the psyche can no longer sustain the facade. That is when deep questions arise, existential crises emerge, the impulse to isolate completely, not as an escape, but as a desperate attempt to reconnect. And it is at this critical point that many discover the way back, conscious solitude as a healing tool. However, there is a secret that few know, something that Jung brilliantly realized, and that completely transforms the way we see those who choose to be alone. A detail that dismantles the stereotypical image of the socially inept introvert. Because, in reality, many of these conscious loners are not just good with people. They are masters of interaction. In the next part, we will reveal this revolutionary discovery of Jung, how people who prefer solitude, far from being socially incapable, often possess high social skills. Carl Jung never considered the introvert as someone socially inept. In fact, he observed something that goes against everything you have been led to believe. Many people who prefer to be alone do not avoid social interaction because they are weak or dysfunctional. They avoid it because they see clearly the theater it has become. And more than that, because they have developed a skill that few possess: psychological self-sufficiency. But what does that mean? Psychological self-sufficiency is the rare ability to generate satisfaction, clarity, and meaning without relying on external stimulation. It is the ability to be emotionally self-sufficient, to find fulfillment not in others, but within oneself. It is when you do not need to fill voids with noise, presence, or validation, because you have already learned to engage with your inner world. And this is not an initial stage of the psyche. It is a high level of psychological maturity, a stage achieved by those who had the courage to face silence and did not flee from it. Such people are not antisocial, they are selective. They know that most everyday interactions are superficial, governed by conventions, masks, and artificial courtesies. They realize that there is more truth in a moment of deep introspection than in dozens of empty conversations. And for that reason, they make a choice. They prefer quality over quantity, meaningful relationships over popularity, soulful dialogues over automatic exchanges of words. Jung called this ability differentiation, the capacity to be comfortable both alone and in company, and to choose between one or the other, not out of obligation or pressure, but out of inner necessity. Those who develop this differentiation can move through the world with ease. They can interact, communicate, even shine in social contexts, but they never lose sight of their own axis. Interaction becomes a gesture, not a dependency, a conscious act, not an emotional need. And here is the key point. These people are not bad at dealing with others. In fact, many of them have social skills superior to those of extroverts. But they do not waste energy on superficialities. They observe, feel, listen before speaking. And when they do speak, there is presence, there is substance, there is depth. They are those people who, even in silence, transform the atmosphere of a space. Not because they shout, but because their presence is authentic, centered, whole. You have probably met someone like this, someone who does not talk much, but when they do, everyone listens. Someone who avoids crowds but captivates individuals, who seems isolated, but when they connect, it is with a rare intensity. This is the invisible strength of psychological self-sufficiency. The world may be in ruins outside, but inside, there is structure, there is peace, there is a center. And that is exactly why these people are dangerous to the system, because they do not buy what they do not need, do not distract themselves with anything, do not bend to others' expectations. They are less manipulable, less susceptible to propaganda, less trapped in performance. They are free. And that deeply disturbs a society that has been built to keep everyone psychologically dependent. In the next part, we will reveal why this psychological self-sufficiency is a direct threat to the status quo. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Psychologically self-sufficient people are a threat. Not through violence, not through declared rebellion, but because they do not need the system to feel complete. And this, within a culture shaped to generate dependence, is unacceptable. Carl Jung realized something that few dare to say. Societies are built to keep the individual distracted, busy, fragmented. Why? Because a centered, quiet, and whole individual is very difficult to manipulate. They do not buy out of need. They do not vote impulsively. They do not desperately seek validation. They are not shaped by collective expectation. They observe it from the outside, with critical distance. And this poses a profound risk to any power structure. Look at how the modern world operates. At every moment you are bombarded with stimuli. Advertisements, notifications, opinions, disposable entertainment, social comparisons, invitations to constant exposure. There is a massive effort, conscious or not, to keep you turned outward, so that you never have time to look inward, so that you do not develop what Jung called differentiated individuality, the ability to become a singular, sovereign, whole human being. Because if you become that, you escape. You escape the control of the media, the consumer industry, mass politics, the compulsive search for approval. You become, in psychological terms, free. And a free being is a problem for any system that relies on obedience, fear, or illusion. That is why the world not only does not encourage solitude, but pathologizes it. How many times have you heard that being alone is a sign of depression? That enjoying your own company is strange, antisocial, or dangerous? That those who prefer silence are distancing themselves from life? Culture has turned the desire for solitude into a clinical symptom, when often it is exactly the opposite, a sign of deep health, of internal alignment, of emotional maturity. And this is not by chance. The logic is simple. The more dependent you are on external stimuli to feel good, the easier it will be to sell you anything, a new product, a new ideology, a new distraction. The centered introvert, the one who cultivates solitude as a tool of strength, simply does not react to these pressures. They do not need to prove anything. They do not need to appear happy on social media. They do not need status, numbers, or an audience. They already have something the world cannot offer: internal contentment. Jung warned us that the true process of individuation, the awakening of the individual soul within the collective, is profoundly subversive. Because the more you know yourself, the less you are swayed. The more you listen to yourself, the less you need to be guided. The more time you spend in conscious solitude, the more you realize the emptiness of social performance. And this leads us to the most important question of all. What do you really hear when you are silent? What emerges when the external world quiets down and all that remains is you with yourself? The answer to this question can transform your life. In the next and final part, we will explore exactly this: why solitude is the portal to your true self, and how reconnecting with that silent essence can free you from everything that was never yours. Being alone is not a punishment. It is a rare privilege in a world addicted to distraction. But to see this, one needs courage. The courage to break free from psychological dependence on the collective, to step away from the noise and finally face what remains when all the masks fall: you. Carl Jung saw in solitude something that few understood. For him, it was involuntary, conscious, chosen isolation that the individual had the real opportunity to find themselves. Because the true self, your deepest, most authentic, unconditioned essence, cannot be heard amidst the noise of expectations, comparison, and haste. It only emerges in silence, and it is in this silence that the most transformative process a human being can experience begins: the process of individuation. To individuate is to become who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. It is to excavate the layers of conditioning, fear, and false identity that have been imposed over the years. It is learning to sustain your own presence, even when it disturbs, even when it scares, even when it destabilizes others. Because an individual at peace with their own solitude radiates something that cannot be bought, taught, or simulated: inner sovereignty. And here is what few have the courage to admit. Most people cannot stand being alone because deep down, they cannot stand themselves. They fear what they might find when the world goes quiet. Fear of discovering that their lives have been shaped to please others, that their opinions are not their own, that their desires are projections of others. That is why they need the constant presence of others, not out of love, but out of escape. You who have made it this far may have felt this, that moment when, amidst the silence, something within you finally organizes itself. A clarity that arises effortlessly, a feeling of being exactly where you should be. No role to play, no expectations to fulfill, just presence, just you. This is the state of true solitude, a return home, a rebirth. And this experience is not just personal, it is revolutionary. Because the more people connect with this internal place, the less the world will be able to manipulate them, the less they will need to be distracted, the less they will accept living lives that do not belong to them. Solitude, in this sense, is more than a practice. It is an act of liberation. Therefore, if you feel different, if you need time alone, if the noise of the world tires you, know that this is not weakness. It is sensitivity. It is strength. It is a sign that you are awakening to something that few have the courage to face. Keep going. Trust the call of silence. It is not pulling you away from life. It is leading you back to it, only now in a way that makes sense to you. If this video spoke to you, I want you to tell me in the comments, what does solitude mean in your life? Do you avoid or seek silence? Does it scare you or strengthen you? If this content helped you, like it, share it with someone who also needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. Here, we are just beginning to explore the deeper layers of the mind and soul. And don't forget, the next video is important. Keep watching. What comes next may be exactly what you need to hear. See you there.